guys in front of Kirk Cousins, and behind him is Jacoby Brissett, who is playing like maybe one of the best steals in the NFL right now
Yeah,
with the
he's playing
Colts.
great.
I think making $15 million a year. I think Dak Prescott's a pretty good player. I really do. I think he's won a lot of games, and he has carried his team sometimes, and he's had bad games too. But he's a guy that I wouldn't mind having the ball in his hands. Tie game with 2 minutes and 30 seconds left, like happened the other day. Carson Wentz. I've seen some Eagles this year, but he looks pretty dang good to me. And of course, my guy Breeze is. I'm always, thinking that he's higher than that, and they're winning a lot of football games. And he's playing well, came right back. And some of these guys, a guy like Breeze, he's been injured, he's been out some, but you know what? You knew his injury, he was going to come back, and he was going to lead the team down the stretch, and he has done that. So, I give him, Drew Brees has played well this year, type of thing. So. Derek Carr I have not seen because I don't really care too much about the Raiders, though it looks like they are getting back in the mix here. And Matt Ryan, the Falcons are really are bad. So there's some interesting names. I would put Garoppolo definitely higher, and I would put Garoppolo higher than Kirk Cousins. I've seen Garoppolo go out and actually win a game with his team down, or do some great things. I just have not seen that out of Kirk, and I think he's way too high. I'd have him actually lower on this top 16 list.
So I'm looking at what Pro Football Focus has for its grading system, which is clearly more scientific. So at least these two agree on number one, which is Drew Brees. PFF has, Russell Wilson, but PFF has Drew Brees number two, Carson Wentz three. And I think Carson Wentz has played spectacularly well to even have them in the mix with that defense, which is a complete joke. I think he's elevated himself. He's also been without Deshaun Jackson. His receiver, Nelson Aguilar, couldn't catch a ball for the first 4 weeks of the season. And then after that, Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, Tom Brady, and Dak Prescott. So let's talk about Prescott versus Cousins, because I have been a Dak Prescott, I don't know what you want to call it, defender or supporter, or whatever we call things now.
Question.
Yeah.
Can you ever actually be on the board early, feel like you picked a winner, all right, the winner's done pretty well, and you're like, hey, I was on board early, and then let's just say Dak Prescott falls apart. Will you jump ship, or you say, no?
Well, that depends, because that does happen sometimes. I'll give you an example. Cam Newton.
Cam Newton is like that with everybody. And I thought early on, I was like, I think he's going to have some good years, but I just don't see this style and the way he holds on to the football and the way he has this bad footwork and he can't run that much. So that's going to sort of deteriorate. He's a big guy. And I sort of saw that coming. I thought a couple of years ago, people had him as a Hall of Famer.
Right. And I think that coming into the league and the things he did early, especially with his legs, it won them a lot of football games. And when he won the MVP, and that's one of the best quarterback years I think I've ever seen he was throwing the ball much better that year, but then he was running like crazy. And people look at quarterback rating for him, but scroll down and look at how many touchdown runs he has. And
Tons
if you
of runs.
tacked those on to his quarterback rating, then I bet it would be a hell of a lot higher.
Oh, and listen, he had some good years. Like he did have some legit good years, and where he was a really, really good player, sort of unstoppable, sort of like this kid, Lamar Jackson, right? I mean, I've heard a great, somebody said, I think it was Stu Gott said, I'd love to have 7 of 8 years of this Lamar Jackson, because I feel like, that could be worth, 50. It's hard to get a 15-year guy to an Aaron Rodgers or a Russell Wilson or one of those guys, but I'll take 8, 9 years of this, or 4 or 5 years of this, or whatever, of defense is really struggling. It's a different style of football. It's almost like Army Navy. It's almost going back to just a different style. But how long can Lamar Jackson do this without being a great thrower like a Tom Brady?
Right.
And with Cam Newton, that was the question. And I didn't think it was going to be that long. These guys on defense hit. It is a different game in college football. And big guys like Cam, a lot of times they do just sort of break down a little bit, and that sort of seems like what's happened with his game.
So I remained on the Dak Prescott bus when he had his down second year, because he lost his offensive lineman that year. And I think Ezekiel Elliott was it a suspension or was injured that season? It wasn't the same. And the supporting cast dipped significantly. And yet he went 9-7. So when your supporting cast falls apart around you and you could still go 9-7, he had 4 game-winning drives that year. I thought he played pretty well overall, and then he bounces back. The supporting cast is better 2018. He has a good season. They go 10-6. They win a playoff game. Again, 3 fourth quarter comebacks, 5 game-winning drives. You add the running element to him, what he did after he got Amari Cooper, as opposed to being forced to throw Des Bryant, the washed-up version, the ball all the time. I thought that helped him a ton. I'm not always convinced how good his offensive play calling was in the past, but then Kellen Moore has come in and done a lot of really good things for him. I mean, circumstances impact these players a lot, but there are some guys that seem to be able to overcome things going wrong and have a knack for that. And then you add the athletic and the running ability and the toughness that he brings. I think he's got a leadership element to his game. All that stuff seems to win pretty consistently. Like, I don't think he's a quarterback that could overcome everything just with his arm, but you add the fact that if you put the guy in the red zone, he's going to be able to run for a touchdown or a third down and long.
Dak Prescott has a sort of a winner element to him.
Yeah.
Right? Russell Wilson does too. Russell Wilson's just better, but they both have it. It's where they just sort of they can do a lot of things. They're strong. They can, the threat to run in the end zone is huge in the NFL. And even Aaron Rodgers is good enough to occasionally pull it and be a threat. You don't want to do that all the time. That's the problem with Cam Newton, right? That might be the problem someday with Lamar Jackson is you don't want a guy who's doing it all the time, but he's a threat that way. When he came out, I saw a preseason game. I think it was like the second or third preseason game. Maybe he played a couple of them I saw. And I looked at his motion and his body. I'm like, that looks like a Donovan McNabb that I think is more accurate and is a better thrower and probably going to be in better shape, like long term. I loved the way the ball came out of his hand. Yeah. He had a quick release. Yeah. For the most part, he was accurate. And he was a rookie. And I'm sitting going, like, I remember when I was a rookie and just how unprepared I was.
Yeah.
I also knew when he was at Mississippi State, he was a winner. And they ran the ball, and they ran more of a spread. But he looked like when he was in the NFL, he understood these, NFL style defenses. Yeah. And he was completing balls and he was accurate in those things. So I've been on board since then. And, that's when things around you change. But at the end of the day, 13-3. 9-7, 10-6. Now he's 5-3. 5-3 with a home game against the Vikings here. So I have liked the way he has consistently played. He's kept his teams are always in the hunt, and he plays a lot of games. He has played 16 games in all 3 seasons, and now he's 8 for 8 in this season. And so availability, durability, those types of things. I mean, he is a franchise quarterback, and in some ways been better than Carson Wentz, who's missed some time with injury. So, and I love Carson Wentz. And so, yeah, I like Dak Prescott, and he's having a very, very good year. And this is going to be, I'll tell you, this defense is going to be tested this week. And I'm really, I said this is a huge, huge game for the Minnesota Vikings, and Dak Prescott's going to be right in the middle of it, and I'm looking forward to him play on Sunday.
So 2 interesting elements off of Dak Prescott when we compare it through the lens of Kirk Cousins, and the running you mentioned is a big part of it for me. So far in his career, he has 21 touchdowns on the ground. He also has 93 first downs rushing. He has 13 this year, 30 first downs rushing last year, which I think is a huge deal in the NFL. You get to 3rd down and 5 or something, and your opponent's playing man coverage, and yet they have to factor in for the fact that Dak Prescott might take off and get you an extra first down instead of having to do all of it with his arm. And then you add the fact that in college, he took a program that was pretty woeful to being at one point ranked at the top of the nation. I factor that stuff in. I factor the winning element.
That's the Drew Brees thing. That's the Drew Brees thing. He took this college that, always isn't as successful usually as the conference around it. And you go, man, the years he was there, they won a lot of football games. That means something. He's doing these things that you can't put into like these numbers of quarterback rating. And he's a good player. And now they've got that, they've got that game. They have a little bit of the Vikings game in the sense of they want to run the football. They've really invested in this offensive line. Obviously, they invested in this running back. They've got some receivers out. Amari Cooper. I mean, I don't know what to say. Amari Cooper on Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes, the way they played a lot of this season, that's going to be interesting. And this number 13, he's one heck of a player. Had that touchdown last week, and they're doing some of that play action stuff. They do some of the bootleg stuff. They have a pretty well-oiled machine there, and they win a lot of games. And so, they said I'm interested to see some of those matchups this week. I don't know what the Vikings are going to do. If they play a little more cover 2, little more, quarters man, change some things up. But it's going to be, to stop that run and stop that pass. If they play all that man to man, it might be interesting, against these corners and against the secondary.
So here's what's fascinating to me is a lot of the running quarterbacks in the NFL, they get pressured a lot because they try to do something extra, right? So they're running around and, oh, now Russell Wilson's pressured on 40% of his dropbacks. He's almost always number one in the NFL because he can hold on to the ball longer. He knows he can escape. He knows he can keep his eyes downfield and make plays off schedule. What's interesting to me about Dak Prescott is that he does not get pressured a whole lot. I mean, he's way down on the list with guys who get the ball out quick, like Kyle Allen, who's running this offense where, they want him to throw those screens quickly to Christian McCaffrey and things like that. He's 24th in the percentage of time that he's pressured. And part of that is because he does have a really great offensive line. And the way that Kansas City shut down Danielle Hunter last week, which is very, very rare, you have now Tyron Smith taking on Everson Griffin. What a battle there of two incredible monsters going at each other, with Griffin having a great year. Tyron Smith is a Hall of Fame talent. And with Prescott, I feel like that's a huge part of his success and something that the Vikings have usually not faced that often this year. They've usually been able to get pressure on almost every single quarterback, but when they weren't able to do it as consistently with Matt Moore, I thought he was able to make some plays downfield. I would be concerned about the offensive line and how much time Dak Prescott has to throw if I'm the Vikings.
Yeah, this is a huge game, sort of a challenge game for this defensive line. They're going against an offensive line that they've drafted pretty well. They've signed guys. They are expensive. And pretty healthy this year. They got Jason Witten back, and I think that's actually made an impact on this offense. He's still getting open. He is still, when teams go, hey, we're going to double the outside people or double somebody else. He has a way of getting some separation, and he's always been a pretty good run blocker. So they've got a group up front that is going to challenge. Sort of, this is a defensive ends, inside guys like mano a mano. This is a huge matchup to watch. As well. But at the center of the whole thing, Dak Prescott. And we'll see how he plays. And there are games where he does throw the ball to the other team a couple times, and he'll make some bad reads and try to force the ball and maybe turn football over in the pocket. He does that occasionally. His interception numbers are up this year. He's at 8. He had 8 all of last year, so that's an aspect that he hasn't been as careful with the football. So we will see how he does behind that line. That they put a lot of good pieces around him. I'm telling you, Amari Cooper is a really good player. Tavon Austin's one of those guys that just flies. Then they got Randall Cobb, so the old vet, and Ezekiel at running back, and Witten, and Gallup, that Michael Gallup, man, he's an athlete, second round pick from Colorado State. He's a Ram out there, and he made a heck of a touchdown the other night. You could sort of see his athleticism. So in that style of offense, where you can run the football and you want to do some play action bootleg, you got to have some guys that can just roll, that can just take the top off. They can just fly. You can double move them. Stephon Diggs can do that. That's the thing what's so special with him, is that he's quick, but he also can go really, really deep. Tavon Austin, one of the fastest guys in the league. I think they got Michael Gallup doing some of these things too. And that opens it up for all these other guys, for Witten and Cobb and these guys, for some of these crossing routes to be underneath. And obviously, he said, the check downs to Ezekiel Elliott are pretty good options. And so,
Yes.
The linebacker and running back, that's going to be an interesting matchup too. Ezekiel Elliott's really good, and it's going to be a lot of him matched up one-on-one versus Kendricks and Anthony Barr. This team is going to be tested defensively, and should be interesting to see how it plays out.
So I will give you a heads up here. Next segment, I was going to ask you about running back value. So keep that in your mind. We will get to that because Dalvin Cook talked about it today. But before we get to a break here, Sage, I want to know how you would decide how to rank quarterbacks. I mean, everyone just says, like, okay, it's this guy playing better than this guy this year or whatever else. I kind of look at it through a little bit of a different lens. I look at it through, if I was going into a season where I knew if I'm a head coach, I'm getting fired, here's how I would rank the guys that I want to be my quarterback. So let's just say, for example, Mitch Trubisky would not be very high on my rankings because he will get me fired more likely than not. Now, if I have Tom Brady, great chance not only I don't get fired, but we're raising a trophy at the end of the season.
Yes.
And then everything in between there. I have probably Dak Prescott higher than most people would because I think, you know what? I think this guy can grind me victories even if I screw up as a coach or even if things go wrong. And when you look at Cousins, it's harder to make that same sort of argument because you look at that game in KC and you say, you know what, a couple of things went wrong. The Chiefs threw some defenses at the Vikings that maybe they didn't expect. Maybe they thought they were getting more single high and they could run their play actions, and then all of a sudden they couldn't. And what we saw from Cousins was the same thing we kind of always see when it's an unexpected result or he gets pressured or something like that. And he criticized himself for throwing off platform too many times, but it's largely because he was standing in the same spot in the pocket. And I think if I'm that coach on the hot seat, I'm always going to take somebody who's a little more dynamic. And I think it's where the Vikings are losing ground with their quarterback, as opposed to maybe 15 or 20 years ago where it was all pocket quarterbacks and like 3 guys who could run.
Call me crazy, but I think the offense, other than Kirk Cousins, I think they're doing a lot of good things. This offensive line, I think, has done a lot of good things, in particular the second half of the season. The tight ends, I think, are making plays when there's plays to be made. I think, the receivers are doing a pretty good job. I think having Thielen out has hurt, but you got to love how we've run the football. Running the football has nothing to do with the quarterback. Right. I mean, in a sense, like we might audible from a run to the left to the run to the right or a run to the left, but hey, they have too many in the box. So let's throw the ball. So it's not, we have control of some things. But the actual thing of running the football, it's get the ball, fake that, give the handoff, and make it look like it could be a pass. Like that's it. Like that's like no responsibility actually of how that play really works. And of course, the details, those things help a little bit. So of that aspect, the Vikings are one of the best in the NFL. So what does that tell you? The other 10 guys are doing their job.
Right.
They're doing a pretty good, and they're not perfect. All right. But a lot of times they're doing their job and they're going above and beyond and doing their job. When a play needs to be made, we're seeing that by a lot of guys, special things. But we're not seeing that out of the quarterback. You do see that out of, the Russell Wilsons and the Deshaun Watsons and the Aaron Rodgers and Mahomes and even Lamar Jackson with the feet. But I don't feel like I'm seeing that out of Kirk. I'm seeing a guy who's executing, who's doing his job when things around him are good. He is hitting guys a lot. Sometimes he's still missing big plays. But at the end of the day, it's not really making the team better around him. And that's what Dak Prescott does a lot of times. And that's what Drew Brees did in college, and he's still doing it. And I have not seen that out of Kirk. And that has been, that has been disappointing the first half of the season. And this is another, what bigger place to see if Kirk Cousins is going to be that guy that was worth $84 million than this week.
Well, that's right. Eventually it has to happen or he's just not going to be worth it. And even he acknowledged that today. Like he said, pretty much every week I go up to the podium for the rest of the season, we're going to talk about how big of a game it is. And he's right. I mean, Denver even has sort of trap game possibilities. And then you go out to Seattle and then Green Bay shows up. And then, week 17, you've got Chicago again, which everyone else is beating except for the Vikings in week 4. And, I think that is the thing with this season, Sage, that we can look at a little differently than last season when we evaluate. Because last year there were huge debates all year long. It was a lot of fun in our position, but to debate how much is DeFilippo's fault, how much is Tom Compton and Mike Remmers' fault, how much is Kirk Cousins' fault. Well, this year, if they don't beat those teams, if it doesn't happen, I'm sure some people will say, well, Xavier Rhodes didn't play as well and they didn't have the great defense. But aside from that, he's got everything he needs. He's got the running game. He's got the receivers. He's got an extra tight end to help him out. He's got Delvin Cook playing like an MVP. Like everything is there for him to win games like this. And if it doesn't happen, it's probably because the quarterback didn't come through. And that's what we saw on Sunday against Kansas City.
Yeah, the aspect of clutch. And that's what that whole, he's a winner type thing is. It's this ability to be clutch when it counts. Not always. But Jordan is the all-timer. Jordan was like, and he also lost games too. But he was, clutch when it mattered. You wanted the ball in his hands, and Kirk has not come through in those times. He's missed that shot almost every single time. But other than that, had a nice 25-point evening during the night. So did he play well or didn't? If he missed the game-winning shot or didn't play well in the fourth quarter, and a lot of these other quarterbacks on this list, by the way, that we started the sort of conversation off with, did do that. But Kirk hasn't done that. The Vikings are 153 yards rushing a game. Again, that has really nothing to do with the quarterback. So I'm loving that a lot of the other things they're doing. And by the way, we still, I believe, were correct on the DeFilippo thing.
Oh, yes. I'm not taking it back.
We
I'm
were
not
asking
taking
for,
it back.
we were asking for screens. We were asking for some play action. We were asking for some under center. And when this offense has done its job and done really well, it's been those things. I don't know what the screen yards were last week. Maybe you can look at last week. Maybe you can look that up for me. But we hit on some screens last week. I feel like 4 or 5 for 15 to 20 yards. I mean, a lot of those 220 yards passing were screens that Kirk had. So this is, again, this matchup here is huge, and we'll see how things work out down the stretch and what the Vikings will do next year. If they think, hey, we've put this whole thing together on offense, we just don't have a guy at the helm to make it happen, to make everybody else better. That sort of leads you into the offseason. What do the Vikings do next?